If you tell people you are retired before you redesign the machinery underneath your retirement, you are doing the easiest part first and the most important part last. That is the first truth. Most people think retirement begins the day work stops. I do not. I think retirement begins the day your financial structure becomes strong enough that work no longer has to hold the whole machine together by itself. Those are not the same date. And if you confuse them, you can leave the office feeling free and spend the next several years quietly building new problems inside a life that was supposed to feel lighter. That is why I want to say something that will sound unusual until you think about it properly. The first 12 to 24 months of retirement are not the years to relax into autopilot. They are the years when the architecture gets set. The pattern of withdrawals, the tax stone, the healthcare bridge, the beneficiary alignment, the estate documents, the insurance mix, the reserve structure, the spending reality, the Social Security timing, the survivor plan, those are not side details, those are the pipes behind the walls. And if you ignore the pipes because the house looks finished from the outside, you are inviting water into a place that is much harder to repair later. The source text you gave me starts with exactly the right instinct. It says that the first 1 to 2 years of retirement are when the most important structural decisions get made, and that the people who quietly upgrade those structures before telling everyone they retired are the ones who preserve more money, more confidence, and more peace for the decades that follow. Fay file a site, Fay turn 53, file 0 Fay. That is completely right. Retirement is not mainly a celebration problem, it is a sequencing problem. The public likes the visible part, the announcement, the dinner, the social post, the congratulations, the feeling that a chapter has closed and now life begins. Fine, but visible milestones have a way of creating social gravity. Once people know you are retired, they begin spending your future on your behalf. Trips get proposed, help gets requested. Grandchildren's schedules appear, meals get arranged, spending patterns change, your own internal voice loosens because the old discipline feels as though it belonged to the working world, and now perhaps you have earned the right to stop thinking so hard. That is exactly when errors get expensive. So I want to make the case for a quieter order. Do the invisible work first, upgrade the machinery, then tell the world. Not because secrecy is noble, because clarity is. Now let me say something in a Buffett voice that many people need to hear. While you are working, a lot of financial problems remain disguised because cash flow keeps covering them. You can have a suboptimal withdrawal structure, a vague tax picture, outdated beneficiaries, mediocre insurance, no real spending clarity, and still get away with it because the paycheck continues acting like fresh paint over old cracks. Retirement removes the paint. Now each decision has a longer shadow. Every account you pull from changes taxes. Every tax decision affects Medicare. Every timing choice echoes into required minimum distributions later. Every neglected legal document remains quiet until the 1 year when silence becomes very expensive. That is why retirement deserves a different level of seriousness than most people give it. Not because it should feel frightening, because it deserves respect. The source file handles this correctly too. It is not telling people to buy boats later or celebrate less because pleasure is sinful. It is saying that before the celebrations begin, the unseen decisions should be aligned so that the retirement you built does not slowly begin working against you. Fay file site, Fay turn 53, file 0 Fay. That is exactly how I would frame it. So let me walk through the 10 upgrades the way I believe they really fit together. Not as a random checklist, as one coherent retirement system. The first upgrade is your withdrawal strategy. This is where retirement truly begins because this is where your financial life changes direction. While you were working, the main question was simple: how much can I save? Where should it go? How do I build? Now the question flips. What account do I pull from first? What account should I leave alone? What order creates the least unnecessary tax friction? How much is safe to take? How much is foolish to take? This sounds technical. It is not merely technical. It is foundational. The source text puts it very well. Once you retire, the critical question becomes which account to draw from. How much to draw and in what order? It points out that many people default to the easiest large account, often the traditional IRA, without realizing that every dollar from that account creates taxable income, stacks with Social Security, and can influence Medicare premiums for years. Fay file a site, Fay turn 53, file 0 Fay. That is one of the most common mistakes I see. People treat retirement accounts as piles of money instead of as different forms of money. They think access is the same as wisdom. It is not. Traditional IRA dollars are not the same as Roth dollars. Brokerage dollars are not the same as pre-tax dollars. Cash reserves are not the same as long-term compounding assets. And if you draw from them lazily, you set a tax tone that can echo for 30 years. That is why I believe in a deliberate year, one withdrawal map, not a guess. A map which accounts fund basic living in the first year, which years create the best window for Roth conversions, how much taxable income is ideal while brackets are still friendlier. How to keep flexibility before required minimum distributions begin forcing your hand later at age 73 or 75, depending on your situation. A retirement with no withdrawal strategy is like a company with revenue and no treasury policy. Money is there, still vulnerable. Now, the second upgrade is health insurance. This is where many intelligent people become strangely casual because the employer handled the complexity for so long that they never fully internalized how much was being solved for them behind the curtain. The source text is very strong here. It says that if you retire before 65, employer coverage ends and you must bridge to Medicare. It explains that ACA marketplace coverage can be attractive, especially when income is managed carefully, while COBRA often looks easier but costs far more. It also makes the key point that withdrawal strategy and health insurance are connected because your retirement income determines subsidy eligibility. Felicite Turn 53 File 0 Fe, that is exactly the sort of connection retirees miss until it costs them real money. They think health coverage is an isolated insurance decision. It is not. It is an income architecture decision. How much you withdraw changes what your adjusted income looks like. What your income looks like changes what subsidies you may receive. Those subsidies can amount to meaningful money across the gap years. That means a sloppy withdrawal plan does not just create taxes. It can also erase healthcare savings. This is why I keep using the word structure. Retirement decisions are not separate rooms. They are connected hallways. Walk into one carelessly, and you may discover you changed 3 other things without meaning to. If you are retiring before Medicare age, you should not leave work until you have modeled the bridge. Not guessed it, modeled it. What does COBRA really cost? What does marketplace coverage cost under different income paths? How do subsidies change if you do larger Roth conversions? What happens if 1 year's realized gains bump you into a worse premium situation? Those are not obsessive questions, they are adult questions. The third upgrade is the tax plan itself. This may be the most underappreciated shift in the whole retirement transition because people still think of taxes in annual terms when retirement forces you to think in lifetime terms. While you were working, tax planning often meant something modest. Max the 401k, maybe use an HSA, maybe itemize, maybe harvest a little, if you had a taxable account. Retirement is different. Retirement asks a much larger question. How do I move money through my own balance sheet over the next 25 to 30 years while leaking as little as legally possible? That is a different level of thought. The source file says this plainly. It says the first retirement year sets the baseline and that bracket filling, Roth conversions, capital gains, harvesting, IRMA management, and other decisions should be handled with the full future picture in mind, not simply 1 year S bracket, file site, turn 53 file 0 Fe. That is absolutely right. A retirement tax plan is not a spring exercise. It is a sequence design. Maybe your income is unusually low for a couple of years after work stops and before Social Security begins. Maybe that makes those years ideal for conversions. Maybe harvesting gains now while your bracket is cleaner prevents much uglier taxation later. Maybe controlling income today helps keep future Medicare costs lower. Maybe failing to convert pre-tax balances while you still have room creates a much nastier single filer problem later. If one spouse dies, that is how lifetime tax planning works. It is not one lever. It is a conversation among all the levers. This is why I dislike when retirees think they can wait and see on taxes until filing season. By April, much of the year's opportunity was already spent or missed. Year 1 retirement tax planning should happen before your first carefree withdrawal, not after your first surprise. Now let us move to the fourth upgrade. Beneficiary designations. This is one of the least glamorous and highest leverage pieces of the entire list. Why? Because the form no one has looked at for 15 years can override the documents you paid the lawyer to prepare. The source text says this clearly. Beneficiary designations on retirement accounts override the will and even trust language in many cases. If outdated, they can route assets to the wrong person, skip someone important, or create unnecessary tax damage and family complexity. It even gives an example of a client whose old 403B designation sent assets in a way that created avoidable tax cost and court involvement. File site turn 53 file 0 Fe. That is exactly why I care so much about the quiet paperwork. People love to imagine estate mistakes as dramatic events caused by dramatic negligence. Usually they are caused by stale forms, an ex-spouse left on a beneficiary line, minor children receiving accounts in a way that creates friction, adult children inheriting taxable assets through a structure that was never updated after life changed, one unchecked box, one outdated designation, then years of careful saving get handed into a mess that was avoidable with 30 minutes of attention. This is why I say retirement should trigger a beneficiary review automatically. Every retirement account, every insurance policy, every payable on death account, every transfer on death arrangement. All of it, not because paranoia is healthy, because final instructions should reflect current love, current intention, and current tax awareness, not a form you signed when your children were still in middle school. Now we move to upgrade number 5, estate documents. This is the one people postpone because it feels emotionally heavy. And that is exactly why it should be handled before retirement becomes socially busy. The source text describes the common reality. Honestly, many people know they should update their will, trust, healthcare directive, and powers of attorney, but they delay because these are not exciting tasks. Yet retirement changes account structures, decision makers, and financial reality enough that old documents may no longer reflect the truth of the present. Fay file a site Fay turn 53 file 0 Fay. That is exactly right. A will written when children were small, balances were lower, and the retirement picture looked completely different is not good enough merely because it exists. Documents are not magic, they are instructions. And instructions go stale when life changes. Retirement changes life. That means the documents should change too. Who has financial authority if you become ill? Who can make healthcare decisions? How are assets distributed? What happens to accounts, property, and business interests? Do the documents work together or merely coexist in a confusing stack? Have trusts? If appropriate, been aligned with the current account structure, all of that matters. Because if you do not make these decisions while calm and capable, the decisions do not disappear. They simply get made later by default, by confusion, by court process, or by whoever is loudest during the worst week of your family's life. I would much rather make those decisions myself, quietly, early, clearly. Now let us move to the 6th upgrade. Insurance coverage. This is where people often keep paying for a version of life that no longer exists while underinsuring the one that actually does. The source file is sharp here. Disability insurance often stops mattering. Once earned income stops. Some life insurance may no longer be necessary if a surviving spouse is already secure. At the same time, umbrella coverage and long-term care considerations become more important because retirement shifts the main risk from lost wages to asset protection and care risk. Faithful site Fay turn 53 file 0 Fay. That is the essence of the insurance review. What risk are you actually insuring now? Not what risk you were insuring 10 years ago. Insurance is not a moral badge. It is a targeted tool. If the wage earner is no longer depending on wages, disability coverage may be a relic. If the household no longer needs a large death benefit to replace work income, some life coverage may be oversized. But if the asset base has grown and liability exposure matters more, then umbrella coverage deserves fresh respect. If a long care event could erode the plan badly, then that conversation belongs in the room now. Not during crisis. This is what retirement does to insurance. It changes the question from how do I replace income if work is interrupted to how do I protect balance, sheet integrity if life becomes complicated. Those are not the same problem. And again, the goal is not maximal coverage, it is right-sized coverage. Paying premiums for obsolete risks is waste. Ignoring newly relevant risks is fragility. Retirement asks you to stop doing both. Now we reach the 7th upgrade, cash reserves. This seems so basic that many affluent retirees give it less attention than it deserves. That is a mistake. The source document makes an important distinction. While working, 3 to 6 months of savings might have been enough because another paycheck was coming. In retirement, you need a true emergency reserve and, separately, money identified for known near-term purchases such as cars, house projects, and large trips so that those costs do not create forced sales from the portfolio at exactly the wrong moment. Faithful site Fay turn 53 file 0 Fay. That distinction is gold. Not all cash is the same cash. Emergency cash is not spending cash. Known purchase cash is not optional reserve. Portfolio assets are not there to absorb every surprise and every planned expense with equal dignity. A retirement reserve should be built in layers, a genuine emergency cushion for the unexpected, a separate bucket for the expected but irregular. Then the portfolio can do its actual job. This is not about becoming a cash hoarder. It is about reducing the odds that an ugly market coincides with an unavoidable expense and forces you into the oldest bad trade in retirement, selling long-term assets for short-term need at the worst available time. That is what the reserve structure protects against. A person without a good reserve is not only financially tighter, he is psychologically weaker. He makes different decisions because every issue becomes urgent. Urgency is expensive. Good cash architecture keeps you out of that mode. Now let us move to the 8th upgrade, spending awareness. This is where many retirees embarrass themselves quietly because they think they roughly know what retirement costs and then begin spending in a lifestyle whose actual shape they never properly measured. The source text gets this exactly right. It says estimates are not enough for a 25 to 30-year withdrawal plan. You need to track your actual spending for the first 3 to 6 months, or better yet, rehearse retirement before you leave work, so that the withdrawal strategy can be built on a real number rather than a flattering guess. Fay turn 53 file 0 Fay. That is one of the strongest pieces of advice in the file. I love the phrase rehearsing retirement because it reframes the problem. You are not guessing what your new life costs, you are testing it. And testing is more honest than dreaming. So many people retire and then accidentally enter a spending spree disguised as freedom. More travel because we earned it, more social spending, because schedules opened up, more helping others, because now everyone knows you are available. More hobbies, more drift, more little leaks. Then later they discover that the true spending number is higher than the number the withdrawal strategy was built around. That is when the real tension begins. So I would rather know the number early, track it, see it, rehearse it. If anything, retirement deserves more spending clarity than work life because the portfolio is now being asked to perform a different role. It is not just growing in the background. It is feeding life. That means the number has to be real. Now we come to upgrade number 9, Social Security analysis. This is where many people make a permanent decision with a temporary frame. They look at a statement, they see a monthly amount, they compare ages, they pick the one with the most emotionally attractive check or the earliest relief. That is not strategy. That is choosing a number in isolation. The source document explains why that is too shallow. The right claiming age depends on how Social Security interacts with the withdrawal plan. Roth conversion, Windows or Maya exposure, and provisional income calculations that affect taxation. It argues correctly that the key question is not which age gives the biggest check, but which age creates the best long-term tax and flexibility outcome. Fay turn 53 file 0 Fay. That is exactly how I would say it. Social Security is not just a benefit decision, it is a sequence decision. If claiming early blocks an ideal conversion window, that matters. If claiming later changes survivor protection, that matters. If the taxable interaction of the benefit with other withdrawals creates more drag than expected, that matters. This is why I think every serious retiree should run a true Social Security analysis before turning it on. Not because there is always one obviously perfect answer, because there is almost always a more intelligent answer than the bigger check looks good or I want something now. Retirement rewards integrated thinking. Social Security belongs inside the integrated plan, not outside it. Finally, we reach the 10th upgrade, the survivor plan. This is the one that bothers me too, because it is the one couples most often avoid looking at until after loss makes the math emotionally cruel. The source file is excellent here. It explains that when one spouse dies, the surviving spouse may lose one Social Security benefit, shift to single filer tax brackets, face compressed IRMAMA thresholds, and continue carrying required minimum distributions on large traditional balances. The result can be a materially higher effective tax burden on the same money with one fewer person in the household. Fay turn 53 file 0 Fay. That is one of the most undermodeled retirement risks in America. The surviving spouse problem. Everything may look workable while the couple is alive together. Then one dies and the same traditional account balance, the same general income structure, and a smaller household suddenly produce a much uglier tax picture that is not a failure of discipline. It is a failure of foresight if no one modeled it early. This is why the survivor plan belongs in the initial retirement upgrade phase, not because it is pleasant, because it is loving. If you know that widowhood or widowerhood creates a tax squeeze, then you can decide while both spouses are alive whether more conversions earlier make sense, whether certain accounts should be reduced intentionally now, whether the estate plan, income strategy, and account mix truly protect the remaining spouse or merely leave them a mess in a prettier folder. This is what love looks like in late life finance, not sentiment alone preparation. Now let me step back and tell you what these 10 upgrades are really doing together. They are not just optimizing a retirement. They are separating retirement from improvisation. That is the whole point. A lot of retirees do not fail because they lack money. They fail because they retire into a life that has never been integrated. The withdrawals are reactive, the health care is reactive, the taxes are reactive, the documents are stale, the coverage is misaligned, the reserves are vague, the spending is guessed, Social Security is chosen emotionally, the survivor problem is ignored. Then the first 5 years become a series of expensive surprises. That is what these upgrades prevent. They make retirement intentional. The source text closes with a point I think is exactly right. Once you tell everyone you retired, the calendar begins filling. Other people's expectations begin arriving. And the small window for calm, high-quality thinking narrows quickly. That is why these upgrades matter before the social world enters the room. Fay turn 53 file 0 Fay. That is the sequencing advantage. Make the big structural decisions while the world is still quiet, because retirement does not stay quiet for long. And the larger your family, the more relationally generous you are, and the more people assume you are now free, the faster your time will get claimed. You may even find yourself saying the line retirees always say, "I do not know how I ever had time for work." I have heard it countless times. And it is funny until you realize it can also be dangerous, because retirement busyness often arrives before retirement design. That is how years of optionality turn into years of drift. I would rather begin with design, then let life expand around it. So here is the final rule I would give you. Do not announce retirement when your paycheck ends. Announce retirement when the structure is ready, when you know the year one withdrawal plan, when the healthcare bridge has been modeled, when the tax path is clear, when beneficiaries are clean, when documents are current, when insurance matches reality, when cash is layered properly, when the spending number is real, when Social Security timing belongs to the plan. When the survivor has been protected not with hope but with math, that is when you announce, not before. Because at that moment, retirement is no longer just a hopeful idea. It is a functioning system, and a functioning system is what gives the next 25 or 30 years their best chance of being calm, efficient, and deeply free. That is the kind of retirement I would want. Not the loud one, the durable one, the one where the invisible machinery is so well aligned that the visible life can finally relax without secretly bleeding underneath. That is the upgrade. And it is worth getting right before you tell a single soul.